The Last Walk. Chapter 1. A Dog Named Max. Max was a scruffy golden retriever mix with a coat that had once been rich and full of life, now faded with age and wear. His once bright eyes had dimmed over the years, but they still held the same spark when he looked at his owner, Emily. Max had been a part of Emily's life since she was a child. The day she found him at a shelter, abandoned and trembling in the corner of a cage, was the day her world had changed forever. At the time, Emily was just 10 years old. Her family had recently moved to a new city, and she was lonely. Her parents, busy with work and trying to settle into their new home, hadn't quite realized how desperately Emily needed a friend. When they went to the shelter, Emily's heart broke at the sight of the dogs in cages, each one looking up at her with hopeful eyes. Max's eyes, though, spoke of something deeper, something that touched her soul. When their gazes locked, Emily knew. This was the dog she was meant to have. Her parents were hesitant at first, unsure if they were ready for the responsibility of a pet, but Emily's persistence won them over. And so, Max became Emily's constant companion. He followed her everywhere, even into her teenage years, when things started to change. Friends came and went, relationships bloomed and broke, but Max was always there. He was her protector, her confidant, and the only one who never judged. Chapter 2. The Last Days of Summer. As the years went by, Emily grew older and Max began to slow down. The playful leaps and joyful runs became fewer and fewer. His joints ached, and the vet had mentioned something about arthritis, but Emily refused to let herself think about what it meant. Max was getting older, yes, but he was still here with her. One summer evening, Emily took Max for a walk through the park, a place they had visited so many times over the years. Max still loved the smell of fresh grass, the sight of squirrels darting up trees, and the sound of children laughing in the distance. But today, something was different. Max seemed tired, his steps slow and labored, and he kept stopping to rest. Emily tried to ignore the pang in her chest as she watched him struggle, but it was becoming harder to pretend that everything was okay. "Come on, Max," Emily whispered, stroking his head gently. "Just a little farther." Max looked up at her with those tired eyes, and for the first time, Emily saw something she hadn't wanted to acknowledge for years. Max was growing old, and the inevitable was approaching. Chapter 3. A Change in the Wind. The next day, Emily noticed Max wasn't eating. She called the vet, who asked her to bring him in for a checkup. When they arrived, the vet ran a few tests and gave them the news Emily had feared but refused to accept. Max had advanced cancer, and it was spreading quickly. There was nothing more they could do. Her world seemed to shatter in that moment. Emily had known this day would come eventually, but it didn't make it any easier. The thought of losing Max, her companion for so many years, was unbearable. She tried to hold back tears, but they spilled over, and she could see the sorrow reflected in Max's eyes. "Max, I'm so sorry," she whispered as she held his head in her lap. "I don't know what I'm going to do without you." The vet explained that they could try palliative care to make Max comfortable, but his time was short. Emily couldn't bring herself to let him suffer. The decision was clear, but the pain was so sharp it almost felt like it was physically breaking her. Chapter 4. The Last Walk. The following days were filled with a heaviness that Emily couldn't shake. She tried to keep things normal for Max, taking him to his favorite spots, giving him treats, and showering him with love. But she knew. The reality of the situation was undeniable. One morning, when the sun was just starting to rise, Emily made a decision. It was time for one final walk. She had always taken Max on walks, but this one would be different. It would be their last. Max seemed to sense it too. As Emily clipped the leash onto his collar, Max looked up at her with a gaze that spoke volumes. He was tired, but he was still there, still trying to walk beside her, even though his legs were weak. Together, they walked to the park for one final time. The air was crisp, the leaves rustling in the wind. The familiar sights and sounds of the park felt bittersweet. Emily took Max to his favorite spot by the lake, where they had spent countless afternoons watching the ducks and squirrels. She sat down on the bench, cradling Max in her arms as he rested his head on her lap. "I'm going to miss you so much," she whispered, the tears falling freely now. "You've been my best friend, Max. I don't know how to say goodbye." Max nuzzled her hand weakly, as though trying to comfort her. His tail wagged slowly, a final attempt at the joyful movement that had once been so full of life. The sun rose higher, casting a soft golden glow over the park, and for a moment it felt like time stood still. Chapter 5. The Goodbye. As the day wore on, Emily knew that it was time. She called the vet, who agreed to meet her at the clinic. Max was too weak to make the trip on his own, but he didn't struggle when Emily gently lifted him into the car. He seemed to understand. There was no more running, no more playing, just the quiet moments they had shared for so many years. When they arrived at the clinic, Emily sat with Max one last time, her heart breaking with each passing second. The vet came in, and Emily could feel the weight of the decision she had made. She held Max's head in her lap, stroking his fur one last time as the vet administered the sedative. "I love you, Max," she whispered through her tears. "Thank you for being my best friend." Max's eyes fluttered closed, and his breathing slowed. Emily kissed his head softly, and she could feel his body relax in her arms. Chapter 6. The Aftermath. The house felt empty without Max. The silence was deafening, and Emily didn't know how to fill the void he had left behind. She kept expecting him to come running to greet her, his tail wagging, his excited barks filling the air. But there was nothing. Days turned into weeks, and though the pain of losing him never fully went away, Emily found comfort in the memories they had made together. She kept a photo of Max by her bedside, a reminder of the love they had shared. One day, as Emily was walking through the park, she spotted a dog in the distance. It was a scruffy golden retriever mix, with bright eyes and a playful demeanor. The dog ran towards her, and for a moment, Emily thought she had seen a ghost. But when the dog stopped in front of her, wagging its tail, Emily knew. It wasn't Max, but it was a reminder that love, in all its forms, never truly fades away. Epilogue. A love that never ends. Emily smiled through her tears as she knelt down to pet the dog. She thought of Max, and in that moment, she felt a sense of peace. Max had been her best friend, and though he was gone, his love would live on forever in her heart. Max's last walk had been a difficult one, but it was one filled with love and gratitude. And as Emily stood up and walked away from the park, she knew that Max was still with her, in every step she took, in every breath she drew. His love was eternal.
If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more stories. And let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you.